Good day, ladies and gentlemen. The 2020 USA federal election paper ballot voting plan. The fair-minded amongst you will admit that our voting system, as it stands, is incredibly compromised. There's a severe danger to our liberties many in our history have fought and died to preserve. I think of my friend from college, Scott Knisley, who died in Iraq on 30 September 2006 as one of them. What follows is a solution to our voting system being compromised, one that should be enacted and can be enacted with rapidity and will solve all the problems of making sure we have a just election. At any rate, thank you for your kind attention for this presentation. We as a country are being deceived vastly and with diabolical calculation. The history of deception strategies is long and varied. 5 centuries before the time of Christ, the ancient yet revered Chinese military strategist and theoretician Sun Tzu wrote, "All war is based upon deception." He further said, "Engage people with what they expect. It is what they are able to discern and confirms their projections. It settles them into predictable patterns of response, occupying their minds while you wait for the extraordinary moment, that which they cannot anticipate." Published in 1808, Sir Walter Scott wrote in Marmion, A Tale of Flodden Field, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave, when first we practice to deceive." In 1944, the Allies called the overall deception strategy leading up to the June D-Day invasion in Normandy Operation Bodyguard. The operation consisted of an army under the command of General George S. Patton in the southeast of England, codenamed Operation Fortitude South, with forces in Edinburgh, codenamed Operation Fortitude North. Both were made up of fictitious units replete with fake materiel and utilized radio messages to non-existent units. Both were also highly successful in misleading the actual Nazis. In that same year, the Soviets wrote in the Soviet Military Encyclopedia about what they called Maskirovka, which was directed to mislead the enemy regarding the presence and disposition of forces. With deception not limited to conflict or politics alone, mankind has also used deception as a form of entertainment. For hundreds of years, magicians used the art of misdirection to draw the attention of the audience from one thing in order to distract them from another. However, the current deception being perpetrated upon the citizens of the USA is anything but entertaining. The justification being used to suggest voting in person is somehow unsafe. With the onset of the COVID-19 Wuhan coronavirus in the winter of 2020, many leaders, primarily Democrats, have called for voting in the November 2020 elections to be held via the U.S. mail. Former President Obama said on 30 July 2020 during a eulogy for deceased Representative John Lewis, "Even as we sit here, there are those in power are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting by closing polling locations and targeting minorities and students with restrictive ID laws and attacking our voting rights with surgical precision, even undermining the Postal Service in the run-up to an election that is going to be dependent on mail-in ballots so people don't get sick." There's no irony in this statement was made in a church where services have been forbidden for months at a service attended by 100 or so people. The justification being used to suggest voting in person is somehow unsafe. In his rather unusual speech, given to ostensibly praise an icon of the civil rights movement and a longtime representative to the U.S. Congress, Obama portrayed unknown individuals as the culprits in machinations to restrict access to voting. Further, he even went as far to allege people voting in person, as has been done primarily ever since our constitutional republic was founded, will become ill by doing so. Disregarding the appropriateness of his speech during what should have been a eulogy alone, the former president brought up two major concerns with regards to the upcoming election. Addressing the second, the president was quite positive if voting was required to be performed in person, the result would be a catastrophic health crisis. He is not the only person in the hierarchy of the Democratic Party that has repeated this mantra. The reality of the situation. President Obama's premise of a vast increase in those infected by the COVID-19 virus, which would occur if voting is done in person, overlooks the reality of the times during the Wuhan coronavirus crisis. Since March 2020, our citizens have stood in lines at the grocery store, the Walmart, the Lowe's, or the Home Depot, and even in liquor stores, interestingly deemed essential businesses, with no outstanding adverse medical consequences. There has not been a quantum leap in the number of severe infections amongst the employees of those businesses, despite the fact they were exposed to long lines of shoppers at a time when the virus was increasing in its scope. For most, the biggest inconvenience, other than the obvious economic losses, has been the requirement to stand further apart, making sure your hands were washed, of late wearing a mask when required, and above all staying home when feeling ill. The reality of the situation, and if not for the gross stupidity of certain governors by ordering elderly people who were infected into nursing homes full of vulnerable elderly, the number of deaths would not have been nearly as high as they are. In fact, as of 13 August 2020, the Centers for Disease Control reports there have been 69,165,988 tests performed in the USA, with 6,208,874 of those coming back positive, for a percentage of approximately 9% of those tested, and a total of 5,176,018 confirmed cases. The disparity of the number of positive tests and confirmed cases is explained because of individuals being given more than one test. Of more importance than the number of tests and cases is that, as of that date, 165,148 people have died as a result of confirmed cases. It is tragic when one person dies as a result of something that could have been prevented. But it is important to note that 0.03190638% of those confirmed to have an infection have died as a result, which means that nearly 97% of those infected have survived. When the U.S. population, estimated as of 2 August 2020 to be 330,052,960, is taken into account, that means the 165,148 total deaths account for 0.0005003682% of the total populace. This means that 99.995% of the U.S. population have survived, inclusive of those infected or not. Further, the concern over illness being spread or contracted by voting in person is utterly demolished by the incredible stupidity of Democratic governors and mayors to allow large groups to gather in person to protest and then do nothing when legitimate protests morphed into a quarter of a year-long orgy of rioting, violence, and mayhem. Moreover, the feared potential for mass deaths due to COVID-19 has not achieved the annual level of deaths due to influenza or tuberculosis. Why mail-in voting? So the question arises, why are there so many, mostly Democrats, calling for voting via mail? Has mail-in balloting proven to be a highly efficient and superbly sacrosanct method of casting a ballot? In reality, the answer is no. Please see also the accompanying presentation regarding voting irregularities and malfeasance, as well as election service providers. And recall, former President Obama was very concerned about unnamed persons restricting access to the ability to vote. Republicans, for their part, with the notable exception of Mitt I am Pierre Delecto and a big fan of voting by mail, Romney, are more concerned about mail-in voting being used to engage in election malfeasance, along with their usual concerns about voter ID, ineligible voters, and voters casting multiple ballots. Much akin to the seeming coincidences of pallets of bricks or stones being delivered to multiple cities where no construction project was scheduled, or ads offering generous pay for those wishing to create disorder, which began appearing in classified sections of cities where protests over the death of George Floyd were beginning, it appears those pushing the mail-in voting scheme are doing so in order to distract us from what is the greater and true threat to the efficacy of the upcoming election. Herein lays the deception. What might really be going on? In 2019, Dr. Robert Epstein, an avowed Democrat, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. He had concluded the algorithms Google utilizes influence millions of votes to be cast for Hillary Clinton. What might really be going on? Well, perhaps of more concern is the number of counties in the USA in 2016 where there were more registered voters than voting-age citizens. Furthermore, there have been demonstrable problems with the few companies who provide voting services, from a lack of openness on the part of the companies themselves to software issues to outright failures. In a society where there are such diametrically opposed political philosophies, the specter of election malfeasance or inaccuracy is not only wholly unacceptable, but would be tantamount to the fuse of a powder keg being ignited. Making a reasoned estimate that if large-scale election malfeasance was going to be perpetrated, it is not too far-fetched to opine such interference would likely do the most damage and be attempted at the federal level. So relying upon electronic machines, only as good as the programs that run them, and the honesty of the programmers, and those who order them around, we are at risk. While there is no demonstrable information to indicate our tech overlords are engaged in active interference, it is a given that many of the technology moguls are progressive in their political persuasion. The voting equipment systems run on technology that a wealthy mogul could have the best chance of compromising based upon available resources and access to skill set. The companies who currently possess the largest number of government election contracts are less than forthcoming in information about ownership, undue influence, severe and unacceptable errors, and instances of incompetence. Thus, they should not be relied upon to be the collector of a vast majority of votes for the 2020 federal election. Of course, neither should mail-in ballots. The bottom line is the citizens of the United States of America deserve to have elections that are just and must be trusted, regardless of which side wins. Currently, as it stands, there is an exceptionally strong possibility the final outcome will be one that is not. The consequences of such a tragedy are unimaginable. So the question is, how may a trusted outcome be established? Well, what can be done? William of Occam's razor is a law of parsimony, adopting the problem-solving principle that entities should not be multiplied without necessity. More directly, the idea of the acronym KISS, popularized by the brilliant aircraft designer Kelly Johnson, is keep it simple, stupid. Both advocates espouse the same concept of simplicity by eliminating unnecessarily complex designs. Again, the question arises, what is to be done? The better idea. Simply put, trash the entire system for the election of federal offices and replace it with a simple one. Quit relying upon machines that can be manipulated and hacked, and instead rely on our children guided by our trusted servants. It would be ideal to include state and local offices, but that would add layers to the complexity of installing a just system with a deadline rapidly approaching of 3 November 2020. So concentrate on the federal offices and make sure they're done right. In this year at least, put the state and local elections back one day to 4 November 2020 and let them go off this cycle as planned. Add only increased scrutiny, especially in the precincts electing urban area district attorneys. After eliminating the usage of the electronic systems and the current precincts for federal offices, the USA should adopt a simplified voting system where 3 paper ballots are utilized. 1 for president and vice president, one for Senate, provided a seat is up for selection, and one for the representative to the Congress. The precincts would be redrawn upon lines commensurate with public elementary school zones, where one would send a child of elementary school age to attend school if they had one. In that fashion, it would be quite simple to determine a polling location, as all eligible voters would cast their ballot at the elementary school near where they reside. All students from the 6th grade level to seniors in high school would be asked to participate in the election process, with adult guidance and supervision, of course. Called up National Guardsmen would assist county election officials in rapidly consolidating each precinct register based upon the geographic confines of the elementary school zone, assisting some voters in acquiring the proper identification in order to cast an eligible ballot, and responding to voter inquiries to assure that those who wish to vote on election day may do so. They also, along with a cadre of volunteer honorably retired police and firefighters, will make up the teams that go in person to voter locations in the week prior to the election day, where the voter is either in an at-risk category posed by the danger of COVID-19 exposure or non-ambulatory, to present and collect ballots to be tallied. As in the case of voters, if a child lived in a certain public elementary school zone, that is where they would report to assist in the election. We can consider this an exercise in teaching civics, in addition to gaining the benefit of children will be less likely than many adults to cheat. A simple plan. What follows is a step-by-step extrapolation on the methodology of instituting such a plan in the short period left until Election Day. This simple plan, just over 2 score of slides on a PowerPoint presentation, can be instituted and should be instituted. It will assure a just election. The plan, Step 1. Once enacted, Step 1 involves the compilation of all eligible voter lists. Each county registrar of elections will be required to provide a complete current precinct list of all eligible voters along with their addresses. Such a compilation will occur from 01 to 08 September 2020. Concurrent to this, all school districts in the USA will be required to provide a compilation of addresses inside each district where a theoretical student would report to each elementary school. For example, all residents in the boundaries of the Weldon-Corbell Elementary School Zone in Frisco, Texas would go to that school to cast their vote. As there are some schools in the USA that bus some children to district schools outside of a zone where the resident lies based upon excess capacity, for purposes of the election, if a voter lives within the boundaries of a specific school zone, they would cast their vote at that school where they would send their child if excess capacity were not an issue. In our example of the Texas precinct based upon the Weldon-Corbell Elementary School, all eligible voters who live in, for example, the streets Panther Road Drive from Gladewater Drive to Gold Camp Road will be assigned to the precinct at the Corbell Elementary School, as that is where their child would attend public school should they have one at that age. The plan, Step 2. Step 2 would be the call-up of National Guardsmen, preferably those residing in a reasonably close proximity to each school elementary zone. Initial call-ups will involve one squad consisting of 4 guardsmen and 1 officer for each zone. From 8 to 15 September 2020, these guardsmen will gather at each school in a room provided by the school and begin compilation of identifying the eligible voters from the list provided by the county, thus creating an elementary zone registry, and will begin providing assistance to any precinct voters who need assistance in procuring an ID. Simultaneous to this, county election officials will complete their version. Step 3 will begin simultaneous to Step 1 on 1 September 2020, but elements will go on until 23 October 2020 as it will involve a public service campaign. If a person who would be eligible to vote has no ID, they should contact the local precinct for assistance in acquiring an ID. The public service campaign should encourage eligible voters to register and vote, and assure registered voters no activity will be required of them. The individual voter will be able to sign on to a precinct page to verify their standing starting 25 September 2020. If there are any issues, they will be instructed to contact the precinct. Non-ambulatory voters may make an appointment to have a guardsman or honorable substitute bring a ballot to them during the week of 26 October to 2 November 2020 so that they may cast a vote. The deadline to request this service is 15 October 2020. Based upon the number of requests, the commanding officer assigned to each precinct may request additional guardsmen or honorable staff to assure completion of all necessary appointments during the assigned time period. Step 4 will involve a comparison of the two lists to create an official precinct roster. This compilation will take place from 14 to 18 September 2020, with any discrepancies addressed by 21 September 2020. Step 5 will entail new precinct cards be mailed out by 25 September 2020. Step 6 will require absentee ballots must be requested by 1 October 2020. It is the responsibility of college and university students. Citizens out of their residential area on 3 November 2020, expatriate U.S. citizens or U.S. citizens working overseas to fill out an absentee ballot request based upon their official residence address in order to secure their right to vote. Members of the U.S. military will be extended all available assistance at the outset of this program so that they may secure an absentee ballot request and then receive their ballot well within the time frame required to assure the ballot may be cast. Absentee ballot requests will be made available at the office of every college or university registrar by 8 September 2020 and online on the Federal Election Commission website. It is the responsibility of the absentee voter to return their completed and sealed ballots no later than 27 October 2020. Meaning they have to have a postmark no later than 27 October 2020. Absentee ballots that fail to meet this deadline will not be counted. Absentee ballots should be sent to the new precinct location in order to be counted. All absentee ballots will fold and fit into a vibrantly colored red, white, and blue envelope, with the dimensions being 8 inches by 5.5 inches. These should be treated with due care by the Postal Service. Each precinct location will have an assigned website where absentee voters may contact the assigned guardsman to rectify issues. Step 7 will have the precinct-specific ballots printed, pre-prepared, with a 5% overage for the number of registered voters in that precinct. Major party candidates will be present on the ballot for the presidency and vice presidency. This will include candidates whose party was in the top 5 vote getters in the previous election cycle. Each ballot will have a spot for a write-in candidate. All eligible declared candidates for each level of office will be printed on a pair of banners. These banners will be raised at each precinct location near the entry to the gym or hall in each elementary school where balloting is being completed. In that way, if someone wished to not vote for a major party candidate, they have the option of writing in a name of a candidate and circling it who is declared for that office. Step 8 will involve the training for children, adult volunteers, and guardsmen. It will occur 1 week in advance of the election on 27 October 2020 and will take place at the school. Children from 6th graders to high school seniors drawn from the residential area in which the elementary school lies will report to that school for training. Adult volunteers and guardsmen will be requested to be there to guide the children. Those people who have volunteered for elections in the past may sign up and report to the elementary school of their neighborhood. Further, recognized major parties can provide names along with a form of identification by 13 October 2020 for observers who may be present on election day. Once a subject check on that individual is approved, they can be present during the training in addition to being on site at the various schools as a party monitor on election day. Clearly marked badges provided by the guardsmen to everyone working at the election location on 3 November 2020 will be provided. On Election Day, polls will open at 0700 hours, 7 a.m. local time, and close at 2000 hours, 8 p.m. local time. The children assisting will be divided into two groups, those assigned for the A shift and those assigned to the B shift. 6th through 9th graders will be assigned the task of being gophers. 10th and 11th graders will be assigned the task of greeting incoming voters, verifying the identity of the voter, having them sign the voter registration form, and provide a thumbprint on that same form, as well as showing them how they should circle the candidate of their choice on the ballot. Seniors will address issues and count ballots after the polls close. They will be responsible for answering any final questions a voter might have or directing that voter to an adult official, and then watching as the voter places the ballot into the appropriate official ballot box, one for the president, vice president, one for the senator, and one for representative. The voter will indicate their choices by circling it on the ballots with the provided number 2 pencil, which should be returned prior to departure of that voter for the next voter to utilize. Step 10 will involve the procedure for the conclusion of voting at 2000 hours, 8 p.m. local time. The ranking guardsman will order entrances secured and then unlock the ballot boxes. All students not attending high school level grades will be dismissed. The remaining students will be divided into 2 or 3 squads, which again is dependent upon a Senate seat being contested. Each of these squads will have students assigned to the vote counter for a specific individual. As an example, students will count all the circled votes for Donald Trump, Mike Pence, while another student will count all the circled votes for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. Step 11 will involve a vote count confirmation by a second team of students for each candidate. This vote count will then be reconfirmed by a senior volunteer. Once this triple check has been completed, and the number of votes for that precinct will be tallied onto a tally sheet. Then each paper will be numbered, beginning with 1 on the reverse side, and will be retained in order. If discrepancies in the account occur, the ranking guardsman, with several witnesses observing, will complete a recount to solve the discrepancy. Once the final precinct tally is completed, the tally sheet will be finished. At the order of the ranking guardsman, an assigned member will log on to the national computer system, provide the appropriate precinct password, and then fill in the state spreadsheet with the number of votes for each candidate and offices from that precinct. The paper ballots will then be collected, organized into their 3 categories, with the tally sheets placed on top, sealed in boxes, with precinct number clearly visible on the outside by the guardsman, and then transported to a designated facility in each state's capital by an armed squad of guardsmen. For example, if a candidate received 822 votes in a precinct, the ballot sheets would be clearly marked from 1 to 822 on the reverse once counting was done. Once the box precinct ballots arrive at the state capitol location, teams of 3 election volunteers will be assigned to break the seal on each precinct's boxes of ballots and in a systematic fashion scan each piece of paper in those boxes into a computer file, which will be retained. A state master tally sheet will be recorded off the precinct tally sheets in order. It will be compared to what has been recorded as the precinct results online. With no discrepancies found, the tally accuracy will be certified. Once scanning is complete, the boxes will be resealed and stored in a climate-controlled, secure environment. Guardsmen will observe this process until the scanned ballots, now again in their precinct boxes, are resealed and placed in proper order in storage. Any anomalies that may occur on Election Day will be handled by the casting of a provisional ballot. Staff will be assigned to log in these anomalies, collect the ballot, and place it into a separate box for the precinct. For example, someone who is on the register, has a voter card, but cannot find proper photo identification on the day of the election will be allowed to cast ballots for the 3 offices, but their ballots will be placed in the provisional box, and a note will be made describing the anomaly on the provisional register. These votes will only be investigated, rectified, and then counted, if appropriate, if the number of anomalous ballots could possibly swing the result of the election for the electors, for presidential election, for the state count for the Senate seat, or for the district count for the representative. If this is the case, and these ballots would not affect that result, then the state's results will be certified. Large notices will be printed explaining the federal laws that could be violated by anyone interfering, altering, misrepresenting themselves as a voter, or disrupting the precinct. Federal district attorneys will be instructed by the Attorney General to prosecute all cases vigorously. By adoption of this system, there are numerous benefits. First, this is an easily demonstrable method of assuring that the votes are counted and reported properly. Our military is of the highest caliber in the world. We should trust them to assure our election is pristine. The reason volunteers assigned to go out to people's homes to augment the guardsmen to collect votes from those with legitimate health concerns, our honorably retired police and firefighters, is that these people served our communities with distinction over decades, and they have been in people's homes possibly thousands of times over a career. Unlike the Marxists at Black Lives Matter, or paid volunteers paid by who knows whom, our citizens can trust these people to help. After all, that is what they did for a professional lifetime. Moreover, the likely second largest benefit of utilization of students to help run the election is to give our children a task they are able to manage to be part of something historic. It will be a great lesson in civics for these young people. Most importantly, unlike a nefarious political hack, a tech mogul with an agenda, or a potentially compromised tech company, students, with proper guidance, will stand up and do a clean job. Continued utilization of thousands of election volunteers, many of whom are elderly and who have been dedicated over the years, is also merited. They will provide an invaluable aid to the students and those tallying the votes. A third major benefit harkens back to former President Obama's assertion that people's right to vote is somehow being infringed by the heinous request of being asked to provide actual proof of whom they are. By offering weeks of assistance in securing proper identification for anyone who does not have said ID, this argument becomes moot. That is, unless one is to believe the efficacy of the assertion by assuredly snarky individuals that progressives really want to allow non-citizens and the ineligible the right to vote. Heavens to Betsy. As for the discussion on felons voting, suffice it to say that is a conundrum that needs to be put to bed another day. In conclusion, the author of this plan does not trust those who, with derision, can be called our tech overlords, or those of vast wealth who agree with 2016 presidential candidate Clinton that those of us in quote-unquote flyover country belong in a basket of deplorables. He believes they will engage in any nefarious activity required to assure the progressive socialist victory, regardless of the outcome of the actual voting. As it stands currently, there is no effective mechanism that may prevent an unjust happenstance, other than blind trust in those who do not merit our trust. We, the citizens of the USA, deserve to have the candidates who win election in a just fashion actually win. This plan will assure that, a just election. And that is something which all people of good conscience should want. This plan has been formulated by Kevin Glenn Huey. Thank you very much. Please reference the companion presentation, Evidentiary Information on Voter Fraud and Incompetence by Entities Providing Voter Services, and administrative issues involving the 2020 USA federal election paper ballot voting plan.